Alright folks, welcome to this exciting video where you once again join me in the wild landscape of Scotland. And for today's adventure I've come to Glen Moy, and in previous videos I have documented some abandoned farms and houses and different little buildings in the different direction. I've been over there before and I've been up onto these wild hills, but for today's adventure I've basically come to find an abandoned farm croft up at this far side. There is a current house up here and I think I need to go past it, and then the track should continue up onto this hill where I believe there should be an old abandoned farm croft, folks. And you know how it is in this video, I just love exploring wild lands basically to find the coolest of old history that's hardly seen and hardly documented. So I'm basically starting down here at this gate. Check it out folks, we're now up on top of this hill. There is a bit of a breeze out here, but just check out this view. Looking down Glen Moy, across to the early monument on the far hill, and then this incredible land. I can see the old remains of some abandoned crofts on the far hills. It's just an amazing landscape on a summer's day. Well, I should say a sunny day folks. It's just the early days of spring right here. So check it out folks, I'm blown away by the scenery here in Glen Moy. There's nothing but hares and rabbits down, and look how big this hollow is in the ground. There's actually big sandstone cliff faces over there. There's this cool little pond. I was following like a bit of a waterway around the side of this hill to see what was there, and there's this pond at the bottom of the hill, and I'm not sure if they've been using this in relation to the old croft back in the day, or potentially this is maybe more recent for like gamekeeping or duck shooting even. But just check this out folks, you can see the setting now of this ancient old farm croft over on the far hill, and we're just blessed with the weather today. There is a bit of a breeze, but once I get into the croft over there we'll be out of that wind altogether and we'll get a proper look at the history folks. And I just love it, look how wild this land is, not even a soul around. It's just perfect. It's the true wild landscape of Scotland we're in folks. So as usual in my adventures folks, I've come off the track and the landscape is completely wild down here. The croft's just up on this green piece of land, and at one time that would have been the prime farmland all around the little croft. And it looks like there's been a cool little cottage and stuff here as well. I'm totally hyped when I find some history or an abandoned place like this that I've never seen before on the channel. I just love exploring it and uncovering the layers of history which hasn't been seen for a very long time, apart from obviously local walkers and maybe the gamekeeper and that. Check this out here folks, we've got the Babbling Brook as they call it, a bit of a little miniature waterfall leading down the way. Check this out here folks, as I approach this ancient farm you can see here this must have been the remains of where the buildings used to stand. Compared to the smooth land of the hill you can see there's old marks of foundations and stuff, and maybe even like an old perimeter wall around the main farmyard originally. But just look at this, there is quite a lot of these buildings still standing to tell the story of the history here in Glen Moy. It's cool to come and document stuff like this before it falls down fully, and I just love adventures looking to see what was done at a certain time for the flow of water. And this is incredible folks, because in here, I've just figured this out, in here is a water wheel shed, and you can actually see there's a channel in the ground coming in and then leading off away down towards that pond. It's like a scar in the ground, and that was actually for a water wheel, so it's going to be super interesting to see what actually remains inside this shed. Wow. So basically this whole end square bit of the building must have been the old water wheel house at a certain time. Wow, what do we have here folks? See, over the years things like this will be changed. This is where the water wheel would have been. Wow, all this will be filled up. Years and years of stones and bits of roof. But look, here's the remains of the bracket where the water wheel would have mounted. That's where the bearing assembly must have gone. Just think, probably early 1900s a place like this was first abandoned. So think about the history throughout the 1800s. This would have been in its prime. but most likely a farm on this site since way back, probably into the 1500s or before it, maybe even earlier. A lot of these farms were little crofts from the beginning of agriculture on this land, and the people that first created these farms were the people that cleared a lot of the land and drained it. A lot of this is boggy moorland, but at one time it may have had more trees and vegetation on it. From what I'm seeing here, it's not been a super massive wheel compared to some of the ones we've seen, but it was probably ample for turning the mill system within this shed. And this must have been a maintenance area. The boy would come out and like maybe lubricate the workings of the thing to keep it going. But interesting detail, you see where the wheel was mounted here? Look, the secondary drive shaft was mounted here going into the building. And that's the kind of farm history that I just love to see. Look how worn all this is, and that could be from the years of the gentleman walking around here to tend to his equipment. And that's the kind of thing I love to think about as I'm walking around, imagining the people that were here when the place was in its prime. People probably made their living from a place like this for years and years, and then one day it was just taken over from nearby, like bigger farms that probably bought the land. The small farm was probably outdated, and then the house was no use. So things like this just stand in the land as a scar or skeleton of the history. And it's cool to come and explore it and just document the building as it stands today before it falls down fully. Look at the way this corner piece is almost completely busted out. And then another little detail, look, there's been the wee door going in here to the water wheel. This would have been the original entrance probably. And you can imagine that churning and turning away, and then the noise of the mechanism inside this shed here. Look, it's had a fair window on it. We'll go and take a look in here. The old mill shed. Look at the ancient stone construction, massive stones. I believe this shed here has been an older construction that was then later converted into the mill shed, and I believe it was in roughly the 1700s that happened. Because I think a lot of these stones would have been put around the window at that later time. And you can see the difference with the construction there with the red stones to make the mill shed. Wow, I'm judging the time frame on that history from other farms I've seen over my years of exploring. Look, there's a nail or whatever chapped into the wall. And look, the big lintel stone's still here, which at one time stood above the window of the mill shed. You have to imagine them coming along here, maybe with a horse and cart, and then like throwing the straw up in here into the second floor. And quite often that's because the farm mill was fed from the top. You would throw the stuff from this level down in, and then it was processed, and then it would be put in bags and stuff down at that lower level. And that's why often on the mill sheds you see this loft door quite high up off the ground. Yeah, what an interesting old building this is, folks. The wee house is at the far end, and I'm just blown away by the history that we're seeing. This door and some of these walls and that, they're on their last legs of existence. Look, there's little steps at one time been leading down here. Wow, and that's the old doorway. That's so special to see. And it's interesting how this is constructed as well. Look, the old roof's gone up here at this angle, so that shows the mill shed was higher, and then this here had the peaked roof. That's probably the top of the peaked roof there with the slates. So all that would have been in the later years of this farm's existence. And then this must have been maybe a better cleared kind of passageway at a certain time behind the farm. After I've looked around at these buildings, I'm actually wanting to head up behind me where that waterway comes from, and I'll see if there's like a little dam, or I'll see how they're getting that source of water. It maybe is just literally from a spring on the hill. Anyway, we'll head back in this door here, and we'll go and take a look at the mill shed first, folks. Yeah, this is incredible. Look how thick these walls are, and look how they've used white quartz and stuff, found naturally on the hill here, used in the construction. Wow, it's so peaceful up here, folks. All I hear is like grouse and hill birds making their call. And now I'm in this building that's kind of out of the wind, and it's so peaceful. This wall looks like it's almost freshly fallen down. It must have been some rumble when a thing like that came tumbling down, but just imagine the wild storms out here. There's nothing to break the wind apart from the building itself. And sometimes on these hills you get crazy storms. Wind and snow and rain. Wow! Thousands of midges has just come flying out of those stones right there, folks. That's the time of year because it's quite damp but also quite mild. There's just so many midges and other flying beasties going around. And then look at this, there's still a detail in line with those steps at the back. Look, the old floor ridge is still there. And that's the kind of thing that's almost hidden by the overgrowth. Every year the plants and stuff grow more and more, covering up the history. Look at those old hinges. And that wooden beam at one time holding the door here. A lot of this stuff, probably as the building was maintained over the years, it would have had new doors and different things sorted on it to keep it maintained to a certain level. And look at the condition of this massive lintel stone, folks. It's crumbled and it's almost tumbled. So a video like this documents it as the mill shed stands. And that's super interesting because it's quite a grand building. It's the biggest building here at the farm. And this is where the drive mechanism was coming through the wall for the farm mill, which at one time was used to bruise the grain and barley for feeding the cows. But also, I'm sure back at that time, they obviously needed a way of getting the grain off the wheat and barley when they brought it in, and the mill was the system they used. Nowadays all that's done within like a combine harvester. Look, this wall up here with the lime render on it, this has got the sign of a more ancient internal wall, and maybe this whole shed was lined like this at one time. Check it out, folks, even houses had this lime render at a certain time. And look, there's some ancient historic graffiti here. I don't know what it says. Aga ES below it. And look, Anne, shout out Anne if you're watching this video. See, this graffiti may have been written when there was still a roof on this building, and maybe some of the locals back in the day used to hang out here. Because that's the sort of thing in the countryside often you would do if you were a youngster. Look, I thought it was a stone slab floor there, folks, but I think it's actually cement. Yeah, probably these sheds and that could have been used right into the 1960s and that, I believe, for what I'm seeing. And look here, there's an old bit of wood still with the blue paint on it. So that gives you an idea of how a building like this may have been painted at a certain time. And all throughout the construction, it's got these natural quartz stones within the stonework, which is cool to see. It's like an added detail. Anyway, let's keep this adventure going, folks. We'll take a look round the front of this mill shed as well to see the true beauty of the building. Wow. Yeah, there's been other little buildings here because I can see the remains of the cement on the wall. But it's been a fair old shed in its day. Probably a decent sized croft originally. You can see the old front boundary wall there leading on, and then obviously all the sheds. There's a butterfly fluttering by right there, folks. The butterflies will be out because of this glorious weather we're getting. Look, I'm trying to get him on video, but he keeps flying away. Anyway, let's keep heading around this farm and document the history. We'll go and take a look at this little house. Look, that's that shed that we were inside a minute ago when we first came around. All these other little sheds have obviously been separate little buildings for different jobs on the farm. Maybe even the old cart. You have to imagine the horse and cart back in the day probably stored in some of these sheds as well. And I can see big chunks of like cast iron and stuff. It must be part of the old farm debris, or maybe even part of the old farmhouse. Maybe at a certain time the fires and that got ripped out and a lot of the stuff got scrapped. Maybe some of the chunks of the cast iron could even be bits of the old bar and mill system. Yeah, and look at this cottage. It's so special to keep finding things like this every week, documenting little bits of Scottish history that I've never explored before. And every week I think that must be about all that's around, surely. And then sure enough, we just keep finding more and more. And I have to shout out Alan for this location. He was the one that told me about it, and there's so much more here on the hill than what I was even expecting. It's mad to see it, the character of that wee house. You can just imagine it when it was in its prime, with the smoke coming out the chimneys, the smell of stovies coming out the kitchen window, folks. Now look at this old stone doorstep. Think of the boots that walked over there, all weathers, going out to do the morning's work or the day's work, maybe walking back in after doing a hard day's work. Think of the snowstorms in the winter in a place like this, howling round, the ice cold winds coming down from the glens up there. And it's just a special scene. When I look around there, I'm just blown away by how vast the landscape is up here. Anyway, let's head into the old farmhouse, see what we have. Wow, look at these tall chimneys here. This must have been potentially a bedroom in the middle, I believe. And then the kitchen at this end here with the grand cooking area. And then this end here, it would have been potentially, these houses only normally had like 2 rooms or 3 rooms, and quite often they would have kind of like a sitting room end of the house that hardly got used. Often it would be just like another bedroom, but most of the time their kitchen area was the room that they spent most of their time in. They would often just sit at the table in a room like that, have their tea and stuff like that, and you have to imagine they would have been using candlelight back in the day when a house like this was constructed, so they probably weren't staying up at all hours of the night. And it's just interesting, look at the way this chimney at this end sadly like fallen down. There's a slight remains left of the fireplace and the old timbers. And then like a lot of the Scottish houses we explore, look, it's had the wee cupboard in the corner. And think of what may have been stored in there at a certain time. Wow, what a view out this window, folks. What an ideal location for a house this is as well. It would be so cool to look out your window over a vast landscape like that. Just imagine how the sky must look from here at night. No light pollution. You can just see so far to the horizons of the Strathmore Valley, all the way up to the wild hills of the glens. Yeah, wow. I often say that when I'm going around, I'm like, wow, but it's because I'm blown away by what I'm seeing, folks. Now look here how the wooden lintels are still in place there, even when the roof above it's gone. Sometimes that old wood can just stand the test of time. Just think how long ago all that was like nailed together or put in. You can see the old square nails right there. And then it probably had a few different windows over the years put in. I believe a house like this was probably on the go a long time before these red window surrounds got put in. I believe that could have been 1700s, the same as the mill. It's like this farm was given one final lease of life and restoration about that time. Then one day it was just abandoned, probably in, I'm guessing, the early 1900s. And then some of these sheds and buildings were still used at that time, but even gradually then they got abandoned as well. And look, the white paint still remains on this kitchen hearth here, folks, or fire surround I should say. The old white paint, you have to think that could be the last remains of the colour this room was painted. There's so much wind howling through this hole. Quite often the stones go like that on these walls because the heat from the fire has made them like weak and they turn to like powder. And then as the weather hits them and freezes them every winter, they just crumble and fall away. And then look at this. This is where the apparatus was mounted. On these metal pieces there was like a bar, so you could hook the pan or the pot onto it, or even the kettle, and then you would fold it above the fire, and then once it was boiling or cooked you just fold it back out here. And then there was like a metal, almost like a mesh thing that used to sit here that you could lay the pots and stuff on in front of the fire. And it's so interesting. The big lintel's gone, but sometimes stones like that were taken for other like projects or houses around these areas over the years. And look, I've just noticed, here's the original. I believe this is the old metal thing that used to sit in front of the fire. Look at this. That's almost like the old fire hearth that's still sitting down there. Wow, folks, that could be the history. And look at this. Here's proper cut stones just lying. This will be the other chimney that fell down. Look how the stones have originally been carved out for the shape of the chimney going up. That's some super interesting history, folks. And I can see it looks like this chimney's been lined with that clay kind of pipes, which was used back in the Victorian era, so I'm not sure if the chimney had been relined at that time. Or maybe that's even when the last like windows and stuff was put in as well. So many years has passed with a property like this. I'm just basically peeling back the layers. Sometimes a building like this has gone through so many changes as technologies and houses improved. And it's cool just to see all those layers kind of uncovered as the house falls down. And this has been a little back room here, a little back bedroom, which has got a real strange little chimney in it, and it must have been, it had like a little wood burning stove, because look how the chimney goes out. But look, it's just a little square hole here, so I'm thinking there must have been an old stove that sat here. Yeah, this is interesting. Look, there's been a pipe going down, so I'm not sure if when toilets and bathrooms and stuff were put into houses, this may have been converted into like the little toilet bathroom area. Or old houses often had a wash house, and this could be the evidence here where they would come and wash the clothes. That'll be where the big sink used to be, and then that maybe explains this. They maybe had a boiler as well for boiling up the water, and that could be the reason that there's no actually a fireplace as such. And look at this, here's the last remains, folks, of the glass out of the window. Look at that ancient glass right there. There's a good few pieces of it, and like everything else, it just turns back into the earth here, disappears, turns back to nature and time. And imagine standing here looking out your window over that hill. It's just such a cool scene. It's like we're exploring a Scottish postcard in an area like this. Look, there's bits of wood there which at one time maybe held on the frame here around the window, and then you can see that lime mortar that's been spread over, which is the character of these old houses. Often in the 1800s there was like wooden lining put over the top of these in quite a lot of the houses. It's almost like a tongue and groove looking kind of stuff, which made the houses warmer, because originally with that lime mortar obviously the walls were cold, and in the winter it must have been damp. Back at the time these places were in their prime, the fires was probably their only source of light and heat in the whole house, and it must have been such a welcoming thing in the winter nights, coming in to the side of the fire there with it crackling away. Then this must have been the little side door here. Let's head on out, folks. It's cool just to document these properties as the years pass and I go on my adventures. It's just cool to keep finding more and more of these, because originally I used to think that I wished there was more around to document and video, but yet here I am years later still just finding more and more. Wow, that wind every now and again blasts through super strong. I just love an angle of history like that, folks. So I was just down getting a few photographs of this little property, folks, and I was just thinking, look at the size of the stones that was used here. Probably when the original farm was put into this location, that's when this massive foundation would have been laid and levelled. And see, today I've just loved everything I've seen. I thought when I was coming up here that potentially it was just going to be maybe stones as good as those sheds and stuff, but to see the wee cottage and the old mill shed, and even the area where the water wheel had been, it's so cool. Look at this in the ground. Big chunks of metal right there, folks. What's that been? See, there's so much going on at these little old farms. Everywhere you look, there's just a little historical nugget. And for some reason, there's been these big metal bits here in the ground. Maybe holding an old fence or an old gate into position. Who would even know? It's just kind of out onto the wild hill when you go down that way. Anyway, let's head on round. The wind here is just super strong, folks, so I'm keeping it moving. Look, I reckon these have been holding a little roof here above the door at a certain time, like a wee porch. And then they've had these little stones at the side Look at this interesting detail here. I'm not sure if that's a pipe or maybe an old, it's maybe an old peak off the roof right there. Oh no, here we go, look, there's more of it here, folks. What has it been? So it is an old maybe drain, could even be an old drain or something like that from the site. Here's another detail, this building here is continued originally and joined up with that shed, because I can see the evidence of that on the back wall as well as the front. Wow, I'm just blown away, folks, by what I've seen today. More history of Scotland documented, and look, the old rowan pipe's still there. Last remains of the history. Anyway, I'm wanting to go up and see where they were getting their source of water from out in this mad landscape. There is quite a lot of natural springs and things around here, so that's probably been the source of the water, I believe. Anyway, I'm going to go further over here to get a picture of the house as well. Check it out, folks, I just found that bit of glass on the ground there, and I'm just thinking that'll be an old bit of a bottle or whatever from this house. Maybe there'd been an old midden or whatever around here, or who even knows, but it's amazing to see that. It's almost like the bit of glass has been brought up from the molehill. This is mad, folks. Just as I'm speaking to you there and speaking about that piece of glass, I believe this here is actually a real interesting old bit of a farmer's pipe. See how there's a hole down the middle of it? Right there. I think that's been an old pipe right there. Farmers used to have pipes, and that has got all the character of that, and I've not really found much of that over the years, but I am aware it is a thing. And like, those pipes could be anywhere. This could even be another one of them. I'm not even sure, folks. That's not a bone, it's a piece of clay, and that's why I'm thinking it's a bit of a pipe, which is some super interesting old history here at the farm. You can see the difference with that. That's some other type of tree or whatever, and it is a different thing altogether. But this clay bit here is super interesting. Maybe there was an old midden or a tip in this area, and maybe these moles are bringing the old history up to the surface. Because back in the Victorian era, and even before it, that's what they had. The farmers all smoked the wee clay pipe. And obviously when they broke it or got a new one, it got thrown out into the midden. And it is mad just to see that wee historical nugget as we go round here. And just imagine the reek fleeing out of the farmer's pipe as he was farming. Maybe ploughing the land here with the horse. Maybe on his lunch breaks he used to come up here and sit. So there we go, folks. What an angle of abandoned history it is. It's just crazy scenes once again on this week's adventure. I'm always blown away by the wee historical details at these places. Look how there's been an old wall as well leading up there. I do apologise for the odd gust of wind on this adventure, folks, but it's just an absolute madness out here. There's no protection. These trees have got no leaves on them yet. The wind's just coming from all angles at this side. Check out those super rare looking daffodils out here, folks. Think how hardy they must be out in this wild weather. That's a sign of the springtime environment that we're dealing with on today's adventure, folks. The daffodils are out flowering, and that's potentially daffodils that were planted from the former occupants of this house. I was just over having a look there because I'm super intrigued as to why it's so boggy, but it looks like there's been an old footprint there of potentially another building, and I think the water's kind of just sitting down in the foundation of it. Now I'm just kind of walking this hill looking for the source of the water supply here that goes down to that, and just check it out. Here I think it is coming out from under the ground, folks. Here's the old water laid, and this is the kind of history that I love bringing you on the channel. Look at this, how it's built. Check it out. It's a proper built structure right there, folks, and it's right under this hill, and that's the kind of level they went to for industrial purposes of the water wheel originally. And see something, it looks like there's a secondary waterway or channel coming around here leading down, but for sure you can see the original construction of this, maybe originally a lot deeper, and that hole there is actually the house of a hare, because I just saw it running in there when I came around the corner. So check it out for the scene of abandoned history once again on this week's videos, folks. And I'm just thinking, I'm wanting to go and try and maybe follow this waterway up and see where exactly they've taken it from. This could be a little dam here on this ridge of ground. Yes, check this out, folks. We've read the land here and it's brought us to this ancient scar of history which would otherwise go unnoticed. Most folk would think this was just a hollow in the hill, but because of the way we've done this adventure, exploring the history, looking at the layers, we can actually tell this is the ancient waterway, well, the dam I should say, which supplied the water wheel at that farm. Just check it out. There's not even any water left in it nowadays, and that'll be because it's not actually maintained and upkept. At one time there would have been probably a couple of sources of water. I can see one of them, there's been a ditch coming in at the top there, and then down here there's been a secondary one, and that would have filled this up to a certain degree. And then at this side would have been a sluice gate mechanism where they could have come up here and lifted it, and then that would have allowed the water to flow down to the farm, similar to the abandoned dam that we looked at in the last video, I believe, on the channel. And then right here is the other end of that like little stone tunnel that we saw. Somewhere underfoot here is a mad little tunnel, and you can actually see, look, there is some old limestone cement still there, and that shows it was most likely like the early days of construction. A thing like this was built and it was maybe taken away because it was made of metal or whatever. Now I believe it's like the home to rabbits and hares. That could be the hole going away in there. I'm not sure, folks. It's like crazy history we're witnessing once again, and I just love to find it and to see this as well. It paints the full picture of the farm, and you can see what was all done here at a certain time for the water wheel even operating. Then one day all that history was just gone and forgotten. All those hours of labour. The land itself at one time could power the farm, and it was self-sufficient. The biggest piece of machinery the farm needed was powered from the water here on the hill. That could still be the way with most houses even. The water wheels could be used so much more than what they are nowadays, because rivers and streams, if cleaned out and maintained, just flow non-stop, especially in these lands of Scotland. What a special place, folks. Anyway, let's head on with this adventure. You can actually see how this outer piece of the dam was originally built, and you can see a clear ridge in the land. It doesn't take long, kind of 100 years later, this is how something would look with the amount of vegetation that grows. The ground here is just super thick moss, and you could dig down proper deep and it's just like a moss carpet right here. Yeah, this is the edge of the dam. Check it out, folks, the old boundary line of the dam leading round here. Documented for the first time on YouTube, a place like this, I believe. It's such a like far out way of going, and I didn't even realise that there was a place like this here. One day in the future I'll have to continue further along these little roads and up onto these hills, document more of the abandoned history that could be within this area. So I believe, like, related to that dam we just looked at, there's been a couple of buildings here as well at this side, not unless this is where the piles of earth were laid. Maybe when they dug the dam out, they probably had a natural kind of boggy wet bit here, and they just took advantage of it and made it a little bit deeper and cleared it out so the water would settle there. Anyway, I'm way ahead back up to this track. It's interesting because on the far hill there's an old stone surround there, like there's been an old croft or an old building as well, which is interesting to see. Right then, folks, since the last clip, this is funny as I had, folks. From the last clip, I was just away to go through these wires. I went through the first one, no problem. See this second one? I just got electrocuted. This here is an electric fence, and I wish that I had been recording, folks. It's a mains electricity electric fence, because I just got zapped up my sleeve, up my arm. That was an absolute madness, folks. I have been electrocuted once before on an adventure. I think I'll head along here where the gate is. I just thought to myself, this will be super easy, because the top wires insulated and so is the bottom. So I was thinking if I went through these middle ones here that I would not get electrocuted, but it turns out yes folks, you will. The funny thing with that fence folks, when I first grabbed it to go through, I was thinking, oh, it felt like I got electrocuted, and then all of a sudden, boom, like it hit me. Look, here we go folks, that's why it hit me. Look, they're all linked together. Every wire there is connected up. And look, one of the wires is actually melted to the bottom. Holy smokes, these wires have all melted. And look, it's just coming out of the ground. That is insane folks. Look at that folks, there's a sign there, warning, electric fence. Listen. I hear it buzzing. Yeah, so I've now headed up this track. This is a different route to the way I came, because when I came into this location I just came as the crow flies over in a straight line to the farm, but on the way out I'm going to head up because I think the proper track leads on and connects down that way. And I can see there's actually freshly burnt heather out here on the hill, which is what they do to control the wild heather and let the new heather grow, and that's crucial for the life of these hill birds up here like the grouse. So look at this folks, I've made it up onto this other hill opposite the farm we explored earlier in the video, and look, this is that other stone boundary that I was seeing on this faraway hill, and the main hill track actually cuts through this. So this is maybe remains here of an even more ancient farm. Look, it's got the similar construction with the steps going down into there. That's super interesting. There's actually been a good few sheds up here, more than what I was expecting. From the far hill it looked like this was just a couple of stones. This is totally mad folks. Look at this, just think about the ancient history. This could even be a croft here that predates the croft we just looked at. It's had some interesting little buildings. If there had been a croft house here, it's most likely to have been this here, because this is about the size and the shape of these old croft houses on the hill. This adventure's amazing folks, just think about that, 2 farm crofts in one video. Check out that, the old bucket. Yeah, the weather today's just been perfect, and look how the sunshine's just moving across the land. These massive quartz stones appear all over the place in an area like this. This old building's had a small end building on it, and that could have been the old outhouse back in the day. There we are folks, it's like a bonus little farm building, and sometimes these are so old you can just tell by like how all the stones have fallen down year after year. Hundreds of years pass. Probably in the 1400s a place like this was thriving, and then maybe even cleared out in the Highland clearances. Sometimes some of these old croft buildings was like that. Anyway, we're back up on the track here now folks, and it is quite a nice leisurely walk. You could have a good walk here in Glen Moy with the amount of tracks and paths. Obviously certain times of year you have to be aware there's gamekeeping going on and hill birds, often grouse or other animals, and even shooting going on. Look at this, we've actually just went and discovered another historical wonder. The sun's not at a good angle, so we'll go around this side of the building so I can show you it properly. But look here, this has definitely been another construction here folks. You can see the square in the land just above that. So you can imagine this is one croft before obviously this road and stuff was put through. The old square of the stones. Wow, it's just historical nugget after historical nugget folks. And then there could even be more on this hill that I've not even seen or documented yet. It looks like there's an interesting rise in the land there, similar to the old dam we saw on the faraway hill. So that's me just about down off this hill here in this remote wild Scottish glen, and I'm parked down there, and that's basically as far as the main road goes. It's one of these Scottish glens where the road only comes so far and then it stops, and then there's basically these little kind of mud tracks and stuff just leading off all directions on the hills. And it's amazing what you find when you go down these roads, all the little abandoned historical wonders. And it was cool to find the farm today that had the remains of the water wheel where the mechanism had been bolted down and stuff. We were able to find the source of their water with that old dam, and it's cool just to document every aspect of the old farms like that. It's just mad how nature takes back over in these places, and the wild weather. Pretty soon all the roofs and stuff come off these buildings. The history's gone. So it's interesting to document it as it stands today and save it for the future generations to see what's actually there on the hills at a certain time, because like I say, like even the brickwork eventually falls down into the ground once all the mortar and stuff comes out. Anyway, I think I would be just as quick maybe heading straight down here, as long as there's no more electric fences, folks. Sometimes my favourite type of adventures are these ones where I'm not even on a track. Like right now, I'm just kind of in the middle of this wild bit of land, and sometimes certain areas here are super boggy and super wet, and you just have to pick the right route, navigate the land, each footstep one at a time. And then today's adventure's been super cool, not only because of the amazing weather we've had, but the amazing history, even the landscape that it's hidden within. It just blows my mind, folks. And it's so cool I can share these videos with people all over the world. Some of my viewers are like in the middle of areas that's got no history like this. Some people even live in like desert areas where there's no greenery or mad rolling hills. So it's cool just to share these little corners of Scotland with people all over the world. Share the history along with it. A way of life there on the hill from a time gone by. The land most likely taken over by bigger nearby farms. Eventually the wee houses and stuff like that, they just fall to the wayside, unmaintained. So that's me back down to the main road here, folks, and it's a brand new road surface that I'm totally loving in this glen, and a lot of the roads in these Angus glens seem to be getting redone just now, which is good news, because there's been so much potholes and stuff after the recent storms. It's just been a madness in Scotland. That massive hill, that's basically, we were right over the top of there in today's video, folks, and I've just come back down. Look at this old road sign. This is what happens to Scottish road signs. It's completely rusted away pretty much, probably put in like the 1960s or whatever. Still stands as a historical wonder, and I enjoy seeing that, the old road sign. It gives character to the land. And then this little stream here flows down the lands of Glen Moy. I think it was pretty ferocious in the recent storms as well. Let's take a look over the edge of this, see what the wee burn's doing, folks. Wow, yeah, this bridge I think was maintained as well pretty recently. Anyway, folks, that's me back to the car, so I'm going to end this video here. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll be back soon with the next adventure, wherever I end up going.